So Ann is certainly a dynamic speaker. I don't like following her because I'm always a bit of a letdown, so consider yourself warned. Which button do I push? That one. The big one, thank you. So Ann spoke about the importance of privacy, the importance of privacy by design in particular. And for an organization like CIHI, we've been around, as Greg said, for a number of years. We've got an army of people working on privacy and security, and we have the ability and the maturity to build in a lot of those privacy by design things. We recognize, however, that not everybody does. Some organizations are significantly smaller. Some organizations are one or two people doing best effort kind of work. So I'm hoping to talk a little bit about both sides of that equation today. I want to address what CIHI does as a mature organization with a mature program for privacy and security. And I also want to talk about what smaller organizations can do. So this is just a little bit about CIHI's privacy and security program. So it is essential that CIHI maintain privacy. In order to ensure that our stakeholders trust us, in order to ensure that we continue to meet our mandate, in order to ensure that Canadians trust us and trust the data that we've got. So accordingly, we've put the effort into building the program. CIHI's privacy and security framework, it's based on the CSA model code for the protection of personal information, which is the same code that the PHIPAA legislation is based on. And it's a number of principles that support privacy of personal information. So if you're not familiar with that, you might want to Google it. Again, it's the CSA model code for the protection of personal information. And you can check out at cihi.ca, you can check out our framework. It's informed by best practices. It's a little bit aspirational, but it really sets the stage for our privacy and our security program and the goals that we're trying to achieve. So what I'm going to talk about next is some of the key program components that we've built into our privacy and security program. This by far is not an exhaustive list of what we do at CIHI in support of privacy and security, but these are the key things that we do and the key things that any organization can do, I think. So you'll notice that the first one, privacy and security risk management, I've called it out, I've bolded it in a different color, and we'll get into why. But really, risk management, and Ann talked about this too in her presentation, risk management really drives everything that we do. So we have limited funds, limited resources. We need a mechanism that we can use to ensure that we're putting those limited funds and resources against the areas of highest risk, rather than areas of lower risk where we're not going to get as much bang for the buck. So through this, I know many of you are from smaller organizations. I'll talk about, for each of these areas, I'll talk a little bit about what CIHI does, and then, like I said, I'll try to address what maybe a smaller organization or individuals can do to sort of achieve the same goals in each of these areas. So the first area is privacy and security risk management. Now at CIHI, we have three layers sort of privacy and security risk management. The first is information security risk management. So for example, an information security risk might be out-of-date software, unpatched software that has a known vulnerability that the bad guys or the attackers or the hackers can take advantage of to create problems for us. Privacy and security risk management at CIHI are those risks that have more of an impact on privacy. So maybe not so much just on the information security and the technology supporting information security, but have a broader risk to the organization. An example of that type of risk might be ransomware. So you've probably heard of ransomware in the news over the last few years. Some of your organizations may have been hit, I hope not. but they tend to, the bad guys tend to look for smaller organizations, healthcare organizations, and educational institutions tend to be the two popular ones as well. So, but that's the type of risk that we would elevate from an information security risk up to a privacy and security risk, because it's of interest broadly and it could affect the privacy on a much deeper scale. And then we have a corporate risk management program, and that's designed to address things like major privacy breaches or major security breaches, where the impact would be much stronger on CIHI. The impact would interfere with our ability to do business. So if I think about if I'm a smaller organization and I maybe don't have the ability to build a really formal risk management program, what might I do? Well, I might want to come up with a common language to describe levels of risk within my stakeholders and the people within my organization. So you can simply talk about high, medium, and low. What would I deem a high risk? A high risk might be something that would affect my ability to do business, would affect the trust of my stakeholders, would stop people from wanting to share their data with me. And all of our work relies on data. So that might be a high risk. A low risk might be something that would be more of an annoyance. One of my computers maybe gets infected with malware, but it doesn't go as far as impacting the privacy of the data I'm holding, or the security of the data I'm holding, or the integrity of the data I'm holding. So that might be a lower risk that I'd think about. So adopt a common language so that you can think about all the risks to your data, and we'll talk about the areas that, some areas of risk a little later, but where you can think about the risks to that data, and you can at least speak a common language, and you can focus your energy and thoughts and money and resources on those areas of higher risk. Human beings are notoriously bad at assessing risk on the fly. So think about how many people are afraid to fly, but will happily jump in an Uber. So we're not very good at it. This is just an infographic that talks about how privacy and security risk management really underpins everything we do at CIHI. And it's really important. Some of the international frameworks, Ann Kavoukian talked about risk, some of the international frameworks all tell us that we should be driving our decisions from a place of risk. CIHI has a very strong governance framework for privacy and security. We have accountability right up to the level of the board. So we have two committees of the board that are involved with privacy and security. We have the Governance and Privacy Committee, which the Chief Privacy Officer ultimately reports up to, and they're accountable for ensuring that CIHI ensures the privacy of the data, which we maintain. And we have the Finance and Audit Committee that I, as CISO, report up to on an ongoing basis for my audit activities. I also get asked from time to time to go to the Governance and Privacy Committee when they have an interest in particular matters of information security or cybersecurity. So again, if you're a small organization, you don't have, it doesn't make sense to have a complex and hierarchical accountability and governance framework for privacy and security. But you do need to know who's accountable for privacy in your organization. So you need to assign that accountability to somebody. And they need to understand what privacy means and the types of things in your special circumstances that you need to do within your limitations and within your realities in support of privacy and security. As you can imagine, CIHI has a large organization that maintains a lot of health data. We have tons of policies, procedures, standards, guidelines, and protocols. You may not. But we have a comprehensive suite. Some of them we make public. Feel free to go look at them. I think there's some good stuff there. It's the product of many years of refinement. So, of course, when we started out, our policies and procedures were overkill, like most organizations. We had an awful lot of prohibitions against an awful lot of things, which interfered with the organization's ability, frankly, to do business. That zero-sum game that Ann Kavoukian talked about. You shouldn't have privacy and security at the cost of your ability to do what you need to do. should be a positive sum game. So over the years, we've been able to refine and mature these policies and suite of policy instruments, and we've allowed the organization to really work in a privacy and security sensitive manner. So in a smaller organization, you won't have an enormous suite of policies. You won't have a library of policies, and it doesn't make sense. But what does make sense is you need to document a few simple rules for managing the data that you maintain, if it's personal information. You might, for example, talk about who can and who can't disclose personal information. You might have documented practices around what to do when you're disclosing that personal information. So the mechanisms by which you disclose it. Put it in an Excel spreadsheet, encrypt it using the Excel internal encryption tool, send it via this mechanism, transmit the password via a different mechanism. You might have some just very basic documented procedures and policies around what you can and can't do. And the documented procedures provide clarity for all the people in your organization. And it also means that what you're doing is repeatable. And as you evolve, you can update those procedures accordingly. This slide is really one of the most important slides in my deck, I think, today. It talks about the secure information life cycle. So information has a life cycle, and this is a very simplistic view of that life cycle. But essentially, you create or you acquire information at the beginning of its life cycle, and at the end of its life cycle, it's subject to disposition, so either permanent archiving or secure destruction. CIHI maintains very rigorous standards around the secure information life cycle. At each and every stage in that life cycle, we have standards and policies and procedures on how we need to securely acquire the data, how we need to securely store it, how we need to ensure that access and use is done in a secure fashion, disclosure is done in a secure fashion, and finally disposition or destruction is done in a secure fashion. If you're a small organization, you may not have a lot of tools at your disposal in this area, but you really need to understand, this is one of the most important things you need to think about. It's only when we do something to information that we increase the risk. If you lock a file of personal health information in a locked filing cabinet in a locked room and you wear the key around your neck, as long as nobody's touching that information, it's secure for all intents and purposes. The minute somebody goes in and starts poking at it and prodding it and sharing it and combining it with other information, that's when the risk elevates. So it's at each stage of this life cycle, you're actually doing something to the data. You're increasing risk every time you touch it. So understand what it is you're doing to the data within your organization, what that life cycle is in your context, and think about at each step of the way things you can do to protect that information and to ensure the privacy. CIHI has a strong cybersecurity program. I'm responsible for that. I have experts who, if they ever took off their white hat and put on their black hat, the world would be in big trouble. You know, we protect the perimeter of our information security, of our IT environment. We protect the endpoints, so the desktop machines and all the servers that house the data. We have antivirus and anti-malware. We think a lot about authentication and authorization. Who has access to data, and how do we ensure they are who they say they are, and how do we ensure that they're accessing it securely? And we utilize encryption. Again, smaller organizations don't have a strong IT budget, and they quite often don't have the cybersecurity awareness and knowledge that we can afford to have in a larger organization. So I think there's three things that a smaller organization can really do that are the most important things that will get, you know, the 80-20 rule, that'll really get you 80% of the way there. The first is get a good antivirus and anti-malware software for all of your computers. Doesn't matter which of the top 3 or top 4 you get them, keep them up to date, renew your subscriptions every year, ensure that they're auto-updating on an ongoing basis, and make sure every one of your machines that handles personal information has that antivirus protection on it. The second is always use encryption for information at rest or information in transit. And so if you review websites of some of the privacy commissioners, pardon me a minute. If you review the website of privacy commissioners, you'll see a number of investigations that all of them have done on privacy breaches. And I would say, a significant percentage of those privacy breaches are the result of somebody copying personal information to a USB key or a CD or a DVD without encrypting it. They shove it in their briefcase or their pocket, they toddle off to the Walmart, and they lose it. And you see this time and time again. Encryption is one of the most important safety controls you can implement to protect data. So Microsoft Office products, if you have a current version of Microsoft Office or a relatively current version of Microsoft Office, it has built-in and strong encryption. Combine that with a strong password for those files, it's protected. The bad guys can't get at it. Adobe PDF, same thing. WinZip, which is a mechanism for making large files smaller, and you can store them in a smaller footprint on your computer. They have an encryption ability built into WinZip. So there's all kinds of really easy software out there. It's no longer the domain of the IT geeks with the propeller hats, but it's something that all of us can use. So that's a really important thing you can do. And then finally, educate yourself on how to avoid email and internet scams, and you've heard of phishing attacks. So those emails that entice you to click on a link or to download software or to go to a website and enter your credentials, learn how to recognize those. There's lots of really good resources on the web. Google it. How do I protect myself online? Adopt good online hygiene habits. And if you do those three things, your anti-malware software, use of encryption, and educating yourself a little bit about good habits, that's 80% of the way to protecting your data. CIHI has a really robust training and awareness program. So when people come in the door, they're trained up on privacy and security practices and policies. They have to sign an agreement every year, a non-disclosure and confidentiality agreement in dealing with the data. We have January is Privacy Awareness Month, September is Information Security Awareness Month. We have posters, we have online training, we have lunch and learns, all kinds of stuff. Smaller organizations don't have that ability. But what you can do is you can Google. Google's your friend. Go to the IPC website in your jurisdiction, the Information Privacy Commissioner in your jurisdiction. Tons of really good information for small organizations on how they can protect their information. Take advantage of that. And then that'll lead you to Google other things. Educate yourself. It's really easy nowadays, and it's something that you can do to really help support privacy. I won't talk too much about audit and assessment, but CIHI does have external review of our practices. So the Ontario Privacy Commissioner under the PHIPA legislation, CIHI is a prescribed entity under that legislation, which means we can collect data for health system use. The Privacy Commissioner's Office reviews our practices every 3 years. Our privacy and our security practices, we submit a many hundred-page document to them every 3 years, and they allow us to continue to collect data for those purposes. So we also maintain an ISO certification for the information security component of our privacy and security programs. If you're a small organization, these types of things, you probably don't have external website, but at minimum, you have to understand what your legislative authority and responsibilities and obligations are. So if nothing else in that area, understand what you may collect and what the legislations and other regulatory frameworks tell you must do to protect that data. Audit and assessment, that's similar to the previous slide. We also have, not only do we have an external audit and oversight program, but we have an internal audit program. So again, for you, if you're coming from a small organization, if I'm in an organization with 10 or 15 or 20 or even 50 people, I probably don't have a robust internal audit program. But what I can do is at minimum, think about the need to know principle. That's a sort of an overarching privacy principle. If you don't need to know it, you shouldn't know it when it's personal information. If you don't need to collect driver's license number, which is a personal identifier, don't collect it. If you don't need to collect date of birth, which is a personal identifier, don't collect it. Only collect that information that you need for the task at hand, and only use it for the stated purposes. So these are all some of the privacy principles, but you can audit this on your own. On an annual basis, you can think about, just review what data you've got and ask yourself, does my organization still need to maintain all of this personal information that I've got in Excel spreadsheets squirreled away on my hard drive on my computer? Ask yourself that question and do a little bit of diligence around reviewing what you've got, who has access to it. So it's not a formal internal audit program, but effectively it's an audit program that's going to ensure that you continue to turn your mind to privacy and security of the information. Incident management allows the organization to track when things go wrong, and they will go wrong on a regular basis. It allows us to look for trends when things are going wrong. So if it's always the same department, it's always the same process that's falling down and causing privacy concerns or security concerns, you'll recognize that. And it allows us to learn from those incidents. So we have, as you can imagine, a very strong incident management program at CIHI. We have a central email address called incident@cihi.ca where staff report all suspected weaknesses or incidents, suspected or actual weaknesses or incidents. So we get an awful lot of false positives, but that's better than under-reporting. When we get an incident, we have a pretty strict protocol. We pull together an incident response team. Some of Greg's folks have been involved in some incident management activities. We think it's a relatively painless process, but Greg may tell you otherwise over coffee later. I think it works. So if you're a small organization, you're not going to have a really strong and formal incident management process, but you should turn your minds to what happens if something does go wrong. Think about it ahead of time. Because when you're fighting that fire and you're like, oh, something bad happened, and you got that knot in the pit of your stomach, like I might have lost some data, I might have lost track of some data, I might have a privacy breach on my hands. You don't want to be thinking about what you have to do at that point. You want sort of a 10 bullet point list at your disposal right then and there so that you can actually do that without worrying about that. And you can turn your mind to containing the incident instead of worrying about what you need to do. Monitoring and reporting, I spoke a little bit about this earlier. Again, the most important thing that you might want to do is monitor the landscape within which your organization works. So that's the legislative regulatory landscape. It's also the risk landscape. Watch in the newspapers and in the media and on yahoo.com and on other websites. Watch for those times when threats like ransomware are becoming more and more prominent. So you can think about it and then ask your nephew, who's really good with computers, what you might be able to do to help avoid falling into those traps. Finally, CIHI has a continual improvement process where I work with my counterparts in legal and privacy on a daily basis. I don't think a day goes by that I'm not on the phone to my counterparts in that area, in those areas. We do ongoing program reviews. We learn from those program reviews, those annual a formal management review of our privacy and security programs. We learn from our risk management activities. We pull all kinds of information together, and we talk about how things are going and where we can improve on a regular basis. Smaller organizations, you're not as formal. That should just happen in your head when you're thinking about what can I do. Turn your mind to it once in a while. What can I do to make it better? What can I do to ensure that I'm continuing to be diligent? So this is my last slide. I think if you got $14 to spend, if there's only 5 things that you could do, this is my top 5 list. Other professionals, other privacy professionals and security professionals might have a different top 5 list, but this is mine. And I talked about encryption already. Patch management for all your systems and software. So every computer that you have, especially Windows computers, in your browser settings, set it to apply the updates automatically. in your Windows settings or your Mac OS settings, set it to apply the updates automatically. You don't want to find yourself with out-of-date software on the computer where you've got spreadsheets full of health information, because it's those patches that address emerging and emergent vulnerabilities in the software. So you always set those to auto-update. Staff awareness, we talked about that. Make yourself and the other folks in your organization, the other folks who are handling that data, develop some level of awareness around good internet hygiene, around how to spot phishing emails and other traps, around good practices for privacy and security. Think about the need-to-know principle in everything you do. The fewer people that have access to the data, the less likely you're going to lose control or track of that data. And then finally, data minimization. Only collect, store, and use data that's required for the purpose at hand. So I think we talked about that. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to